Good evening, Lisa. Good evening. What do you think?
What have you done to your hair? It looks ridiculous.
Well, flatten it then. Do something with it. Oh, that's better. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It still looks dark. I'm on the wrong page. Are You Being Served? Season 3.
Mm-hmm.
Up Captain Peacock. From the 13th of March 1975. Somebody's gone out and bought a camera crane.
Yeah.
As we've got a high shot of the gentlemen.
Opening it.
Not of the gents.
No.
What's Mrs. Slocum in? Green and turquoise.
Mm.
Yeah. Captain Peacock's coming up in the lift and he's about to be presented with his 20-year service badge.
Long service badge.
From Mr. Rumbold.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all going to applaud him and present him with it. Except the lift goes down again.
Yes.
So everybody gets in the lift to go down.
Mm-hmm.
Then they come back up again, and it's all a load.
Yeah, it's a lot of faffing.
I noticed Mr. Humphreys has got a very nice bow tie on.
Yes.
And this will lead us somewhere in a minute. Eventually, the lift comes up again, except it's Mr. Mash and a dummy.
A dummy.
Mr. Rumbold was going to say it gives me great pleasure, and Mr. Mash insists that being in the lift with the dummy gives him great pleasure as well. He all seems to be in lifts with dummies, doesn't he?
He was always sort of canoodling with it as well.
I don't know what he gets up to. It's very odd. Eventually, they sort of give it up as a bad job, start to head back for the counters. But Captain Peacock runs back up and he's all puffed.
He's puffed out.
Yes. So he gets a badge with GB written on it.
In 22 karat gold.
Plate.
Yes.
And not only that, he's specially honoured in that he gets the key to the executive washroom. And Mr. Granger is appalled at this.
He is.
Because Mr. Granger's been here 35 years and he's never been once.
No.
And now they're instigating a new lunch time system. Previously they had lunch between 1 and 2.
And they closed the shop.
Yeah. And now they're having it between 2 and 3. Why they couldn't have staggered the lunch breaks? I really don't know.
I don't know how you would even serve that many people at one time. That's a lot of work for somebody to serve the entire store staff.
I'd have thought it would have been staggered over
in our shop, it depends.
It overlaps.
It overlaps. It depends what time you start work. So the earlier you start, you go to lunch. So because I start around 9 to 9:15. Mostly, I normally go to lunch about 1 to 1:30. On one occasion, it was 20 to 3, but there's a story to that which I'm not going to tell.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Captain Peacock had applied for an increase in salary. This was not approved.
No.
But he has now been granted access to the executive dining room as well. So he says thank you to Cuthbert and gets told very firmly it's still Mr. Rumbold.
Yes.
But yes, he sort of goes around and he's swinging the key on the chain.
He's got like a watch chain with his keys on, hasn't he? So.
And Mr. Granger says, look at him flaunting it. Enter Geoffrey Siegel, who wants a bow.
A clip-on bow tie.
He wants a bow, he says.
Oh, yes, sorry.
So does he want a tie, a violin or Robin Hood?
Yes. And when Mr. Granger is asked if he's free to do a clip-on bow tie, he's appalled.
Yeah, no.
A clip-on bow tie?
He's certainly not free for it, and neither is Mr. Humphreys.
No.
Mr. Granger, in fact, is heading for the staff bog.
Yes.
As he's keen to point out. So Mr. Lucas gets it. I quite like the fact that because they're snobby, Mr. Lucas actually picks up a bit of custom.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're not keen to.
No.
Sell him one at all. Because the clip-on one, he says the spring is very so strong they can use it as a mousetrap.
Yes.
No,
it doesn't seem to want to stay on his collar very long.
No, it goes all wonky, doesn't it?
Right.
But they say basically these are awful. And Geoffrey Siegel says, well, why are you trying to sell me an awful bow tie? And they say, well, we're not trying to. You were the one that came in and asked for it.
So as they show him one on a piece of elastic.
Yeah, because he's going to an army reunion. There's a pre-tied velvet on elastic for £2, and this turns out to be what Mr. Humphreys has actually got. Or a handmade silk one for £5 that you have to tie yourself.
Yes.
I like the fact that because it's over twice as expensive, you have to do all the work as well.
Yes.
So so Mrs. Slocum is going to the cinema.
Yes.
With a
young man.
With a young man who had his hand on her knee.
Yes.
And they're going in the back row of the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And how does she know this? Because she's already booked the tickets.
Yes.
Well, you do that. You book the tickets for me.
Yeah.
Don't you?
No, I aim for the back row a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But not for the same reason.
What's the story about the back row at the BFI? Was it the BFI?
BFI. Oh, the Museum of the Moving Image.
Museum of the Moving Image.
Yes, when they had the Museum of the Moving Image near the BFI on the South Bank, we went a few times, didn't we? And I went once with Nick.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if this embarrasses you, Nick, if you watch this. And there was a cinema bit. It was a huge museum. There was a cinema bit.
Yeah.
And we went into that, and you didn't obviously give any money over.
Yeah.
But you said, did we want the 4 and 3 tickets or the whatever the back row cost?
Yeah.
Now Nick was sort of, like, do you want the back row, sir? And Nick
nudge.
And Nick was just sort of a bit oblivious. No, in the end, no, we'll have the 4 and 3 ones because we would have been there all day. So sorry, Nick. I think you missed that. There was another occasion. This is nothing to do with cinemas, but I have to tell this story because it's really good. Because there was a bit on with a screen on a train because of
I know
Eisenstein, is it?
Yeah.
And it's all about the Russian Revolution.
Director, yeah.
Yes. And there's a bit where there's a pram going down the stairs.
Yeah.
And it flashes up Lenin, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And every time it flashed up Lenin, the actor that was playing the Russian got really overexcited and shouted, "Lenin!" at the top of his voice.
And we were the only two there.
We were the only two there. So, but yes, that's nothing to do with what we've just seen.
He was putting on his best acting.
He was
just
doing
for
his best
an
acting
audience
just
of
for
two.
us. Yes.
Anyway, where are we? So yes. Now Mr. Mash turns up with a load of stock.
Yes.
Jumpers, earmuffs, and what was your bras actually?
Yeah, brassy, yes.
And Sensi Touch rubber gloves.
Yes.
Which come complete with a display model.
Yes, because the kitchen department has ordered 1,000 pairs too many, so like, everybody's getting a box to try and flog.
So the display thing has got it's 2 hands there and another 2 hands as though they're playing the piano.
A piano keyboard. And Mrs. Slocum is appalled by this.
But yeah, Mr. Mash says, "I don't make them, I just deliver them."
As the midwife said to the bishop.
Captain Peacock is called over because Mrs. Slocum doesn't like it.
No,
but
just approved.
Captain Peacock doesn't like being questioned because he's already approved it.
He's already approved it, yes.
Miss Brahms points out that women live longer than men, which hasn't got much to do with it.
No, but she just wanted to tell him that.
Mrs. Slocum thinks that Captain Peacock is a pompous twit.
Yes.
Meanwhile, Mr. Humphreys and Geoffrey Seagull are learning how to tie bow ties.
Yes. Now, if you can imagine, thinking about it, the scene in, I know you've never seen this, but the scene in Ghost where Demi Moore is making a pot on a potter's wheel and Patrick Swayze's got his arms around her having like pot.
Yeah.
It's quite similar in some ways.
Okay, right.
Because Mr. Humphreys is stood in front, Geoffrey Seagull is stood in back, and he's tying the bow tie.
Yeah, with his hands
round him. And then Mr. Humphreys says, "No, it's my turn." And he goes round, and Geoffrey Seagull turns to look at him and he's like, "No, turn the other way." I don't think he wants Mr. Humphreys.
Yeah, was it up and over, make a bow, through the hole, and there we go.
Yes. It would have been better off with the elasticated one, wouldn't it?
Mr. Rumbold comes to see the display model that's been complained about, which, thanks to some fiddling from Mrs. Slocum, is now blowing raspberries and making V signs with its...
Yes, doing sort of rude Winston Churchill signs.
Yes. Enter Donald Hewlett plus pipe.
Yes.
Yes. And
those were the days when we had to smoke.
He wants to buy a dress for himself.
Yes.
As he's going to a fancy dress ball.
Yes.
All the men are going as girls. Mrs. Slocum declares that this is very gay. He turns out to be 42 inches, including spectacle case. And he might stuff some oranges down his front, or possibly tangerines, as Miss Brahms suggests. Mrs. Slocum goes and gets something from the under £10 Cotton Seconds maternity range.
Yes.
I love the way that it's so specific.
Yes.
They've got a range.
And it's hideous.
Just for that. And he has to go and try it on in the gents.
Changing room
department. Yes. So Mr. Granger's going off for his coffee break in the staff cafe, as he says. Mr. Humphreys is suddenly very free for Donald Hewlett trying on a dress. He says it's for a fancy dress party. That's what they all say. Then enter Michael Knowles. You know, we are really getting everybody here. He's being fitted for a jacket and trousers, isn't it?
And they're very tight. The trousers, they're tight and they're about
they're too
5
short
inches
as well.
too short. Yeah.
You can sort of see his socks and everything. Eventually gets given Donald Hewlett's jacket and trousers, and he's quite happy with those. Somehow they seem to fit.
Yes,
and I don't believe that they would.
But they're already fit. You're already worn in, he says.
Yeah, but I don't believe they'd fit in
particularly
particularly
they're quite different shapes, aren't they?
Yeah. So, what's it? They sold a suit like that to Robin Day to be used as a test card, apparently.
No,
so.
When he retires, he's going
to be able to use it as a test card. Because, of course, this is the old BBC test card. It's the one with the girl and the clown on, playing noughts and crosses. And there are various check patterns on it to sort of test the cameras and your telly. But Captain Peacock sees Donald Hewlett in his dress. "Can I help you, sir or madam, as the case may be?"
Yes.
And he wants to go and spend a penny. It's 1 o'clock and it's another hour till lunchtime. Mr. Humphreys hadn't had any breakfast and there was nothing in the fridge, though he did try boiling an egg. He wanted an alarm call at, what was it, 3 minutes past 8?
Yes.
And it was already 8 o'clock.
And he had an argument with the operator.
Yeah,
and by the time they sorted it out, the water had gone away and the egg was hard.
Yeah. Mr. Granger's in a mood though, and he phones the factory inspector. Mrs. Slocum's got a coffee percolator, and Mr. Lucas says he's suffering from wind. Captain Peacock says, repeats the fact he's going to lunch in the executive restaurant. Mrs. Slocum says he's Lord Muck now. Apparently gets a choice of wine with his chicken fricassee. In the desert he was trained to go without food or water. The coffee percolator makes a noise.
Yes, makes that sort of gurgly noise.
Which he assumes is Mrs. Slocum, and he said Rommel would have heard that from 10 miles away.
Yes.
Right. Mr. Granger sort of backs down a bit because he doesn't want to be branded a troublemaker.
No.
Because I suppose he's already had this experience.
With the coffee break thing, yes.
So again, that does sort of join up a bit in character terms. But when he hears about the executive dining room...
He goes off.
He goes off anyway for the telephone again. So yeah, Mr. Lucas says get rid of Captain Peacock. So Mr. Humphreys phones up Mrs. Slocum, pretending to be from accounts, and asks him to get Captain Peacock to go and see them. So with him off the floor, Mr. Humphreys is asked to take over.
Yes.
As and he sort of strides about with his sort of bent over, sort of with his hands on the small of his back, sort of hitting them together, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
And then he gets told to stop being silly. Basically.
No, he just gets a look, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Captain Peacock, and he does his normal
skippy walk.
Yeah.
Yes. Lift. The lift. Yeah, they have to press the lift button 3 times, which is a secret signal. And Mr. Mash appears with Meals on Wheels.
Yes. Mulligatawny? Can't even say
Mulligatawny or Minestrone.
Minestrone or minestrone.
Cut to the canteen now, and when it really is.
Oh, Mrs. Slocum misses out though.
Oh yeah, she doesn't. She
doesn't get to the lift.
Yeah, she has to go for second sitting.
Yeah.
Mr. Granger's having soup, and he's doing his real sort of dredger thing, isn't he? You know.
Yeah.
And it's lentil soup as well.
It's getting under his plate.
Yeah. Mr. Lucas has got shepherd's pie, and apparently this has been quite popular with the flies.
Yes.
So he's advised to put some brown sauce on it to hide their footprints. Mr. Humphreys has got melon balls. Mrs. Slocum's got a pilchard. And Mr. Granger's going to have a roll mop herring as well. There's a green thing on Mrs. Slocum's lettuce.
Yes.
Now you don't actually see it, but she has a good old go at it with the...
And one thing that struck me is that it's obviously a plastic plate it's on.
Right. Why?
The way she whacks it, it would probably break a normal plate. And also, it makes this sort of just clamping noise.
She's smacking at the green thing
with a fork.
With a fork.
Yeah, or a spoon or something.
Yeah, she sort of bashes it on the head several times and sort of squashes it. Yes, and if you think Mr. Granger eating soup is bad, you should see him
eat spaghetti. I've seen him eat spaghetti. It's yeah.
That's later on, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I've got that to look forward to.
Yes.
Apparently, the factory inspector's already had a call from Captain Peacock.
Yes.
Because it was upsetting his desert stomach. Mr. Rumbold goes into the exec dining room, and Mr. Mash appears with his huge plate of shepherd's pie.
Humongous plate of shepherd's pie.
And he wants to sit with them as Captain Peacock's not there anymore. But he's told that there's a vacancy by the pig bins by Mrs. Slocum. Captain Peacock goes into the dining room and gets a little round of applause.
Yes.
Very sarcastic. And Mr. Granger says that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And then he goes back to his soup and
does some more dredging.
And then snorkel for Mr. Granger is the advice. Peacock and Rumbold, and they're in the executive dining room, and they've got some wine.
But it's 25p a glass.
25p a glass. They get the menu. Soup du jour, lentil. Le shepherd's pie, le romo. It's just the same as.
It's the same as the other part of the canteen.
It's just in French and slightly more expensive, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
But they do get an après wheat mint. I could do with some of those. I like them.
Let's have a look when we go shopping.
Yeah, the wine is Peruvian Beaujolais type, described as hilarious. This was the days in the 70s when I think everyone was very snobby about wine that wasn't French.
Yes.
You know, these days, you get wine.
Peruvian wine would be quite acceptable.
You get wine from all over the world now, and I have my moments when I'll decide to try a different country. But yeah, in those days, people were very snobby about wine, weren't they? Often with no knowledge, though.
Yes.
That's the thing. I mean, I don't pretend to know anything. But
no.
It would be like a sort of secret thing about wine that people knew about it or pretended they knew about it.
Yes.
And then whilst all this is going on, suddenly the wall gets removed.
Yeah. Well, there's banging to start with, isn't there? And Mr. Grace comes in.
Yeah.
And says that the canteen's too small for the amount of people that are using it.
Yes. And so it all has to be knocked into one, and some workmen appear and remove the wall extremely easily.
Yes.
It's just like they've taken a couple of screws out and
it's probably just a stud wall.
And just lift it up and
off it goes.
And off it goes. But yeah, even that they'd have to do a bit more work than they do. It's clear that it's just a bit of BBC set, isn't it? So yeah, it's going to get knocked into one. And by the sound of it, so's the staff lose as well. Mr. Gray says you're going to have to use the staff bog as well. And yeah, off they go with the wall, and suddenly the canteen set is bigger. And remember, we said a couple of episodes ago how small that set was.
Yes.
So clearly they've planned that in the set design, thinking they're going to have to extend it later on. But I thought that was a pretty good episode.
Yeah.
What would you score that one out of?
I think I'd score that one 7.5.
Okay, I'll give it a 7. I think. Yeah. I mean, it's I like Mr. Granger's sort of indignation in this. That he should have got something years ago, but clearly has been overlooked, and that's obviously sort of he's quite sort of brooding over that. So I like that. But and Captain Peacock being quite snobby as well about it as well. So some good character stuff there as well. I mean, no huge laughs, I'd say, but nice to see Knowles and Hewlett in it together.
Yes,
even if they don't really share a scene.
No.
But yeah, all in all, quite a good one, I think. Okay.
Yes, and next up after this one is
next?
Cold Store.
Is it? Cold Store. Yes, Mr. Lucas feigns illness to avoid work, but his plan backfires. ... Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.